Welcome, everyone. This is David Morgan of themorganreport.com, and this is my first interview for 2024, and I cannot think of a better one because this is hitting, I'll call it the alternative financial media, and it's David Webb who wrote the book, The Great Taking. His website is thegreattaking.com. The book is a PDF you can download for free. You can also get a hard copy if you want to pay for it. There's an audio book, and he's also done a documentary. On top of that, he's done several interviews. I've not watched them all, but watched many. And it's rather upsetting, to put it in polite terms, of what the legalities are surrounding the assets in general, or equities and bonds. I was responsible. My biggest video ever made, David, you may not know this, was called something about the banks taking your money. It was all about bail-ins. I was interviewed by Stansberry Research, and that video is the largest viewed video on Stansberry Research, 2.5 million views on that video. And basically, it's only about what you already know, and is that as if you put your deposit in a bank, you're an unsecured creditor, and you can be bailed in. And that was only, I think, a 20-minute discussion, but the title, the subject line was truthful, not clickbait. And of course, it just, again, got more views than anything I've ever done. This one may not do as well, but hopefully, because it goes the next step, well, at least I own my stock certificate. At least I've got a treasury bill, and I'm safe. And what we find out from The Great Taking is that's not the truth. So I asked my people, many of my readers, followers, go pretty deep on these topics. And I asked them to ask me to ask you, well, what their questions are. So I'm going to give probably one of the hardest ones right off the bat. This comes from a gentleman named Martin Armstrong. You may or may not know of him. I've known of him for a very long time. And Martin's blog wrote, and I'll quote it, "To suggest the government is going to take everything you own is just not true. That would be revolution time," all caps. "And the government would collapse instantly, or not even the army would support them. You must," all caps, "understand the difference between unsecured and a secured creditor. Equating this to the taking of gold is not the same situation. Your money in the bank at the time was expressed in dollars, not ounces of gold. The Supreme Court held that changing the backing of the dollars did not change the dollar that you had or owned." I think he obfuscates a little bit. My opinion, I'll give it over to you, is he kind of diverts us here on what you said about the gold situation. You've been very specific and got the legal language posted in the book showing what the legal structure is. But let me just hand the question over to you. First, it's a two-part question, really. One is, would it be revolution time? And second is the difference between unsecured and secured.
Yeah, Martin managed to mix a few things together in that statement. And yeah, it needs to be pulled apart and addressed in separate pieces. The idea that this would not happen, I demonstrate quite clearly that there's been a very sophisticated planning and implementation sustained over decades behind this. So it isn't for no reason. And it is an overreach to say, I'm not saying everything you have, but it will be, you really have to think about it clearly, because it's designed to be quite comprehensive and to really subjugate populations globally. There may be things you can hide in to be not the first to fall, but my message is ultimately there's nowhere to hide from this, and we have to face up to it. The idea that it wouldn't happen, you just have to go back and look at what transpired in the period of 1907 to the 1930s to see this is basically the same playbook at that time. And I in my book, I've really focused just on hard facts. It is absolutely irrefutable what I demonstrate in terms of the mechanism for this.
Let me
Senior,
stop you there. I hate to interrupt, but
Yeah.
there's a subset to this that is more specific, and I think it'll be a even more a better answer. So,
well,
give-
but let me just finish by saying that, pointing to, for example, I had not read G. Edward Griffin's book, Creature from Jekyll Island. I knew about this from my own father and my own work. That's what was there. But I've since read Ed Griffin's book. It's absolutely critical reading for people. And again, very well documented. The references there are very valuable. But what responding to Martin's point here that they would never do this, well, come on. I mean, look at what happened during that period of time. And Ed Griffin pieced together what the objectives were of the planners of the Fed from their own statements. Now, I haven't gone through that to the primary sources yet, but he did. And what he talks about is that one of their chief concerns was that particularly the Western and Southern banks were growing rapidly, quite successfully, and that businesses broadly in the economy were becoming self-financing. They had sufficient cash flows to be sustainably self-financing. So what did they want to do? They wanted to consolidate control. And how did they do that? They literally had to destroy all of that. And that's what they did. They destroyed all of those banks, and they effectively destroyed the economy, destroyed these businesses, so that they were not self-financing. They were then reliant on the credit creation of the Fed from that point forward. And we have been trapped in that ever since. It was a deliberate strategy. The gold piece of this is that gold was broadly distributed with the public. And so they created a construct that the Federal Reserve System was backed by gold. And then they created the rationale that in a crisis, they would need more gold backing. And that was used as the justification for confiscating the gold from the public. Now, come back to the first point, that they had to destroy the economy so they could consolidate their control. They also had to take the gold of the public to prevent a parallel system from operating with metals, with gold. So this, you just have to go back and look at it and understand it, that this absolutely has been done. You have to understand that the banking power has always been joined at the hip with warfare and killing people, literally killing people. There is nothing they will not do to expand debt and maintain their power.
Absolutely. Thank you. Again, sorry for the interruption. Brought many thoughts. I'll comment very briefly. All wars are bankers' wars. Ed Griffin is in my documentary, Silver Sunrise. He's the first one I interviewed for my documentary. I'm going to ask you to be in it as well. But there's another specific from Martin's website, and I'll read it to you. There seems to be a misunderstanding of title and law. There was a Supreme Court case that goes to this very question of secured title to assets and unsecured. Grupo Mexico de Desolano, SA versus Alliance Bond Fund, US 3081 in 1999. The court overruled a district court that seized unsecured assets without a judgment and trial. The Supreme Court ruled that there was no power to do so before a judgment. The power resides only with secured assets, such as a mortgage where the title has not passed to the homeowner until he has paid off the mortgage and as such, there is no question who owns the title. Legal precedence has been established, so it, quote unquote, all caps, may not be the likely that the unsecured assets are seized. I say may because those in power pick and choose enforcement. Please comment.
Okay, well, it's necessary to understand the subtlety of this structure, but it's irrefutable what has been done, and that we know this because of the response of the Federal Reserve, the New York Fed, attorneys for the New York Fed, responding to the questionnaire of the Legal Certainty Group in Europe. That is such an important historic document. I included it in its entirety in the appendix of the book. I pull out excerpts, and they are mind-blowing. So this is not conjecture. And what they are they're very pointed about it, because they are explaining to the Legal Certainty Group, which, by the way, is about legal certainty that the secured creditors take the client assets, right. And that it is property that at the lowest level, at the level of the customer has not entered into any agreement to pledge that property as security. So there's a subversion here. For example, in Sweden, it used to be, and it's still in the law, that property cannot become encumbered as collateral without an express written agreement. But then when they implemented the Central Securities Depository Regulation in Sweden in 2014, after basically 20 years of trying to figure out how to subvert Sweden's law, undermine the property rights, they added beneath that except when the securities are being transferred to another entity that is regulated somewhere. So they inserted something in the law to allow transport of that client collateral without the knowledge of the clients, without an express written agreement. And they did that so that it can conform to the US model. And what happens is, like DTC in the US, literally all securities are pooled. And what that means is that the system, at a higher level, those client securities are used without restriction as collateral, underpinning mainly derivatives trades. So you can go into documents from the BIS making this very clear that this is what is happening. This is not conjecture. This is happening now. This is happening in a big way. And when the securities are pooled, they can be transferred free of payment, FOP. So it's done without the knowledge of the clients, without any consideration. And the Fed makes it clear twice that even client securities that are segregated are in the same pool and only entitled to a pro rata share of what remains in that pool after the secured creditors take the property they can control. So it's absolutely clear.
Is this great taking a global phenomena, or are there any exceptions?
You know, we know it's very clear in the U.S., in Canada, in Britain, in all of Europe. I believe that Japan is completely part of this. It is. I do not have personal experience. I haven't been able to go into how it might work in Russia or China. But the ambition is for this to be, I expect all of the British Commonwealth countries are in this net as well. The ambition is for it to be comprehensive globally.
This next one's from one of my members. I've read the book, of course, and watched the recent documentary. I also have made an effort to watch all of David Webb's interviews and read several articles about this. David Webb doesn't mention Seedy and Company in The Great Taking, nor have I heard him mention it in his interviews, although it's possible I've missed it. Could he explain the relationship between Seedy and the DTCC, and also give his take on the purpose for this company under the Great Taking scenario?
Well, I mean, seed is just the title used in the holdings at DTCC. To me, it's the same thing. DTCC and seed are the same thing. I don't see the significance of the name per se, and that reveals some other structure behind this.
I paid off a mortgage and I'm completely debt free. I have a home equity account with zero balance. Should I close the account? The bank is USAA Federal Savings, which has a high ranking. My primary residence has no mortgage. It's got 2M in value. I'm going to keep this anonymous, so it's just a question to me. However, I have a 250K HELOC with zero balance. Am I at risk at a bank institution confiscation bail-in with an open zero balance equity line of credit?
To be safe, I would eliminate things like that. To be honest, I don't know. To be honest, I don't know. To be safe, I wouldn't have credit lines open against my property.
Well, I used to trade futures as a living for a while. I had a rule, when in doubt, stay out. I didn't really know the answer, but if I had enough doubt, I just let it ride, and that saved me. So,
we know we can't really trust that they're doing anything for our safety and security.
Right. Please expand on this quote from the book. Quote, "It's quite possible that the big banks have suppressed the price of gold by selling paper gold in subsidiaries, which will be allowed to fail while accumulating physical gold in subsidiaries which are designed to survive. Specifically, is this conjecture based on solid information or something else? Also, is it feasible for a large publicly traded bank to obfuscate such a subsidiary, or does it refer to central banks?"
Well, that's a very good question. I have to say it is conjecture. It's just based on my understanding. I've done due diligence on big companies, and it would take weeks, maybe months, with a team of lawyers to really understand the structure of a major holding company and the subsidiaries. So you can't do it from the outside. And even working on the inside, doing due diligence, it's a big job to understand it. And these are not, so it's not one pocket. It's more like a battleship with different, watertight chambers. So the subsidiaries, the purpose of having subsidiaries is to separate assets from liabilities, essentially. Yeah. So you have certain subsidiaries that are designed to be very solid, that are not going to drag you down, and you have other subsidiaries that you can bankrupt when the time comes. It's a simple step once you understand that. And when you watch what goes on in the dynamics that, and especially with paper trading, the scale of paper trading, that you could know that that you can have exposures taken to suppress something while another hand is buying it. Come on, it's very easy to do that, and no one would know about it. So it's not surprising that you wouldn't know about it, but you can surmise that it's there. I often find things that way, is that I can see, well, it must exist. But it'd be difficult to really know for certain until you're inside. And certainly central banks can do this. And certainly central banks can set up entities that are completely black. So we know during the last financial crisis, the Fed created, I'm forgetting what the facility is now called, but essentially the US commercial paper market froze up. Commercial paper being like 30-day paper from AT&T and the biggest companies that would be rolled over in these borrowing facilities, and that locked up. They couldn't be rolled over. So the Fed created an LLC, funded it with $1.5 trillion instantly, created money to liquefy the commercial paper market. They created Maiden Lane 1, 2, and 3 to buy derivatives, making the banks whole, just lifting them out of the banks who own the Fed. So those were done in LLCs. They can create, now they made those entities explicit. They chose to show those to the public because of the crisis atmosphere. But they can do that anytime. And we don't really know what they're doing with those things. So they can create things, put money into them, and intervene in various ways.
And you asked David what involvement Michael Palmer had in writing of the book.
I wrote the book secretly on an old computer. I was afraid to connect it to the internet, not because I was afraid for myself. I was afraid I wouldn't be able to complete the task. So I did it secretly. There were only a couple of people that knew that I was doing that. And then when I connected it, I emailed it, the manuscript, to several hundred people. That was my safety, to get it out that way. And the links, I had the documents going back over 10 years, 10, 15 years on my computer, but many of the links were dead. And Michael was one of the very first people who contacted me and said, this is very important, it has to go out. And he dropped everything and worked with me. And he has published books. He is one of I think he's the smartest guy I've ever known. Just to let you know who he is, he's a German medical doctor who has advanced training in immunology and microbiology, who worked, Sushrit Bhakti, who some of you may know who he is, said that Michael was the smartest student he ever had. And Michael was at the University of Waterloo. He wrote he's a chemist as well, biochemistry, and he wrote the textbook on biochemistry and pharmacology used at University of Waterloo. His special focus is in lipid proteins and the interaction with the cell membrane. And he had the temerity to speak out against the COVID narrative and was fired for doing that by the University of Waterloo. This man with an incredible background, to understand exactly what was happening. He was fired. So I respect Michael very much. He has helped me immensely. He jumped in and really, I wrote the book. He hasn't changed the text, but he went in and made sure that if there was any link that was dead, he found the document, or he asked me and I had it and I gave it to him, and then he put it up in an archive where it couldn't be taken down. And I would say, Michael, that incredible cover image, Michael found that. So also has an aesthetic sense.
A Renaissance man on exponential functions.
Well, yes. Also, he comes from 5 generations of German theologians.
Wow.
So he is a smart guy.
Yeah. Okay. Is it likely for a brokerage firm like Fidelity or Schwab that we could lose all our money we have invested in our various stocks that are held in these brokerage firms? I think that's self-evident, but you know, they pay me, I'll ask the question again.
Yeah. Yes, there's no alternative. They are all pooled. So they're all exposed to this mechanism, and you have to understand that they're at risk. You know, I have to say, you know, I have money in bank accounts around the world. I have assets in a U.S. Treasury fund, but I tell my wife, you know, we can lose those. So you have to have other things. You have to be set up to be able to live if that happens. And maybe we'll eventually get to this. Real point is, none of us want this to happen, so we have to stop it from happening. But we can come back to that.
Well, we're going to end on that. This is more direct what you were implying there a second ago. If society is not able to reverse the direction of the big taking, and we are not able to get out of debt, is there a strategy to protect oneself? For example, I walk away from my house. I have extensive food and other storage goods. I have 13,000 ounces of silver, 5,500 is in an IRA, and 3,000 in junk. No leverage to silver. The only debt is my mortgage. So he's asking if he walked away from his mortgage and had his bags of silver. You know, I'm interpreting this for you. I probably shouldn't. You know, where does that leave him?
You know, I say to people that, you know, since writing the book and ask questions like this, you know, yes, it's true. Lots of people are in debt that they're not going to be able to get out of, or it would be very difficult for their families. So I say to people, look, don't do something that will destroy your family's happiness, destroy your marriage, destroy your happiness and well-being. If you can do things that will actually reduce your stress level and make you feel more secure, do that. But it's a very personal decision how to go through this time that we're going into. And some people may choose to stay in their home with their debt because they need a place to live, and all their neighbors have lots of debt. And we just have to face up to this to stop it. But yes, there were people, I mean, you really go back to the 30s to understand it, people that had mortgages. They when the economy is crashed, and I think we can see that they could do that. It's being hollowed out. When the economy is crashed and price levels fall, it's really by design that they will stay down for a long time. And the people will lose their access to their financial assets, and that's what was done. And so you won't be able to service the mortgage, and they then consolidate the claims on those homes into some entity that is designed to take them over. Presumably, they will then rent them out somehow to people that are behaving themselves. So you'd have to go off with your silver and find another place to be. I guess it comes down to, and I'm not an expert on this. I know in the same period when they changed the safe harbor laws to allow J.P. Morgan to take the client assets in the Lehman collapse, that in that same time period, they were also tightening up personal bankruptcy that made it more difficult to walk away from a home. That's the way it is in Europe and has been, that people cannot walk away from just hand in the keys and walk away from their homes. It's a personal claim against them. But I'm not an expert on that. Could you have a cabin somewhere that you could own free and clear in a different state? And that might make sense, to have an alternative place that you own free and clear where you can go.
So I'm going to move away from the monetary topic for a minute. There was a docudrama that was given to me after I lectured in London years ago called The Man Who Took Down the Banking System or something. I thought it was about George Soros. It wasn't. It was a BBC docudrama about the oil market going askew, the huge derivative positions that went wrong due to conflict in the Middle East. In that docudrama, the Minister of Energy, or whatever he's called in the UK, comes on and he says, I can't do a very good British accent, so have a laugh, but why? Everyone thinks that the world runs on money and finance and that type of thing. But that's not true. The world runs on energy. And without energy, nothing happens. And that really was a profound statement. It really hit me hard because, if you go back to like barter and tribes and no money, we still had to exchange some type of energy. You grew crops, you made a bow and arrow, whatever. So my point is, have you considered the overall energy situation in your thinking as far as how this collapse goes? Because if there's only so much energy available, we don't have new sources. Is that part of the equation of why they want to grab everything?
I always think in terms of flows and forces, and I think in terms of when something is down, is something holding it down? If something is propelled upwards, what is propelling it upwards? So it's not the thing itself. People think it's about the thing itself. It's about the forces acting on the thing that are holding it down or pushing it up. So and to think about where is the potential for change if you remove the forces that are holding something down or pushing it up. So for example, selling pressure. If you have selling pressure on something, once that it runs its course, then it can start lifting, and buying pressure. Simple as that. Well, it's the same thing with energy. If you really look at the situation for decades, the purpose of military policy has been to take supply out of the system, not to provide supply. People get confused about that. They think, oh, well, this is about making our gasoline cheaper. No, it's the opposite. It's about taking the oil of Iran off the market, or taking the oil of Iraq off the market, or taking the oil of Russia off the market over and over again. That's what's happening. So, for example, the energy shortages in Europe are completely artificial. So I do not I do not think we are running out of energy by any means. Its supply is being suppressed.
Okay. One of my Bitcoin maximalists said, is Bitcoin exempt? And I'll just fill in a little bit of what we had on a conversation, and that is, it's free of government, it's decentralized, there's no CEO, and to turn off Bitcoin, they have to turn off electricity. What are your thoughts on Bitcoin or maybe other cryptos? I'll throw that in as far as being an asset class that might not be taken in the Great Taking.
Yeah. Well, I think it's fine. People should diversify. I wouldn't lean too heavily on any one thing. It's a time to really think differently about diversifying. So could Bitcoin be a reasonable diversification? Yes. I personally have suspicions about Bitcoin because here's my problem. It emerged during the last financial crisis out of nowhere in that context. And it has been, no payment system is allowed by this central bank cartel. It's things like this would be attacked and destroyed. You wouldn't be allowed to, for example, for a long time, you could buy and sell it and it wasn't even taxable to do that. Yeah. They certainly, the body language is that they were the most positive face you could put on it is they were studying it, that they just wanted to see kind of how it worked and how it was adopted. But come on, you have to understand, they do not want parallel systems. They do not want people to be autonomous. So it's a judgment call as to whether it has been allowed. You have to watch and see what you think about that. I am concerned that there is a back door into it, that it could be taken away at some point. I favor real things.
I'll back you up on that. I wrote a piece years ago. A lot of people trust me in my thinking, and certainly I'm human and get a lot of things right or wrong. But I wrote an article called My 2 Bits About Bitcoin. It goes to your core point. They don't want competition. So if it becomes a true competitor to the system that they're running, I pretty much assure you that it's going to go away. It'd be heavily taxed, moderated, whatever. So moving on, this one is, I'm not embarrassed to ask you. This is, in fact, I get this question very often. And I was taught this as a youngster when I started trading, in my teens really, and been interested in the markets my whole life. Should I take my stock certificates? And what I say is no, because if you get your stock cert, you just got a piece of paper that's a beneficial owner certificate, if I understand it correctly. And now I've got to take that and mail it back in to put it into the electronic system before I can sell it. Am I off base there?
Well, let's talk about it. I don't mention it in the book because it's not an investment advice book. It is what to do about it. This is such a personal thing, and so that isn't what I was doing with the book. But I will talk about this. The problem with first understand that in the 30s, in a profound drop in price level that stays down, basically 80–90% of all public companies cease to exist eventually. The equity layer is wiped out. And for many, many years, people would not touch equities because of that. So what happened? All of the ownership goes to the secured debt in the public companies. So this is the good old-fashioned way of doing it. It's been done for centuries that way. The equity is wiped out and the control goes to the debt layer. And then for decades, the debt even traded at less than face value. So it all gets into the dynamics in bankruptcy. So I've thought about that. If you get the paper certificates, good luck finding a public company that doesn't have significant debt levels. They have all been encouraged in the name of capital efficiency to borrow cheaply. So we have that problem. They're all levered up. And I think I say in the book, those the gods would destroy, they first encourage to borrow cheaply. And that's what has been done over the last 15 years. Now, one thing I will mention that I have done is a reasonable thing to do. People that I talked to whose families got through the Great Depression and they were wealthy and they held on to their wealth, they had shares in gold mining companies or, silver mining companies also. And the thing is that even if that company has debt, financial debt, they're sitting on a monetary asset and they're producing a monetary asset so they can service the debt. And so we know through the Great Depression, even though they confiscated the gold, those companies were paying dividends and people were in pretty good shape that own those companies. So if you own the shares and they're held by DTC, you would lose them. If you get the certificates, you have a shot. And I have looked at these certificates. I've done this. They don't want you to do it. They try to talk you out of it every step of the way. It is cumbersome. It will take weeks to get them through the different steps you have to go through. But when you get the certificate, what you see is it's clear that it is collateral. So you are the owner of those shares. So you can get on a plane, go anywhere in the world, and use that share. It is a numbered share certificate. It's the way it used to be. It's a vestige of, it is. It's a vestige of what the system used to be. And you can do that in the US and Canada, and I understand Britain. Now, Sweden went so far from being the strongest system in the world in terms of ownership to being such good boys and girls complying with the EU that it is now illegal for companies, public companies, to even issue share certificates in Sweden. So they don't want any of that. We don't want to allow anything like that, but there's a vestige of it. Now, one thing that I surmise from that it is possible that people that are actually, let's say, behind this are using this as one of their tools. And that's why it's still possible to do in certain places. So that it's something to consider. But I also think that, if this is allowed to go far enough to really achieve something like what Klaus Schwab is envisioning, they will eventually get around to everything. That's why we have to face up to it.
This is a bit esoteric. Can the system come down and not really reboot? In other words, it gets in a chaotic situation. I'm sure your math level's, higher than as high as mine or whatever. I'm not trying to make a big point here, but the idea of entropy and the randomness. I mean, let me elaborate. In the long-term capital management went down. I mean, they were the $1 trillion bet. That's a movie done by it. And they could predict human behavior. for maybe 99% of the time. But you cannot predict human behavior 100% of the time, and that's what took long-term capital management down. So based on that unpredictability factor, do you think that this thing could explode and we get into like an Ice 9 situation, cat's cradle, where the system freezes? Because from my understanding, I've read pretty well on this, on the 2008 financial crisis, that's what the elites use, or the mainstream. As you said earlier, not in that reference, the paper wasn't being accepted. So the Fed came in and said, well, that dog pile paper that you don't trust from bank A to bank B, we will just buy that crap and we'll give you treasuries, and the system unlocked. So I made a two-point part question. One, could it freeze? And two, could it not reboot?
Oh, well, I guess this is in the realm of belief for me, which is
I said esoteric.
that these are all constructs. They are all artificial, and so they can be made not to happen. They can be we can say this is a construct that does not serve us, so we're not going to do that anymore, and this is how we're going to do it. So there, I don't believe that this is unsolvable by any means. The problem is there are people that don't want us to solve it, to face up to it. I think it could be there are fairly simple things that could be done to move. I think things could get better right away if you just have the people that are the central banking power is not able to control this any longer. Now that's the hard thing to get to. So if it gets really awful, it's because they're making it so, and they just have to be stopped. It's totalitarianism. This is what people don't realize. This is not capitalism.
Right.
These people have been behind every awful socialist, communist, totalitarian regime. And they also need to understand, people in the US, this is not being done by the Russians. It's not being done by the Chinese. It is being done by the central banks, the Federal Reserve, the CIA, the State Department. It's being done from the highest levels of our government.
Well, let's go with the last 10 minutes. This is, it's going to show, it's not showing. I got my desk lamp on. It says, join the resistance. Join the resistance. So let's spend the last 10 minutes or so, open forum to you on, ways to mitigate. I get a bit philosophical at the end of some of my interviews, but, I am a big believer in the human spirit. I do believe in a higher power. I believe in the tenets of the Constitution, and freedom is above all, really. And there's a direct correlation from what I've studied of, ownership value of money, where you own a gold coin and you might deposit it in a depository, but it's your property. The ownership theory of money. Don't want to go down that road. I want to explore all of your ideas that we have time for on what can the average, above average, the debt-free person, the I could pay off my debt person, the I'm horribly in debt, all those three, that might cover the majority. What would be your thoughts on helping others here?
You mean in terms of what to do to?
What to do or not to do. I mean, maybe you get yourself unbanked. You take your $10,000 out, you put it in the gold, silver, and food. I don't know. I just want to randomly open the forum to you.
Well, I think
one answer. There's no one size fits all. We all know that. But there's also general principles that seem to work. We could look back at the Great Depression and talk about.
I think. Well, first, I mentioned this earlier, is not to destroy your happiness and the happiness of your family and your children. You could be in a situation where you're living somewhere as we're going into this, and your kids are happy there and they're in school there, and it would really be bad for you to sell the house and say, we're going to go live in a trailer in the mountains. Other people might be able to do that. So it's a very personal thing. The other thing I know from being a trader with, lots of positions at the same time and incredible stress and pressure, that you don't make things a monolithic decision. You don't make it all or nothing. If something seems to be, you're getting the sense you should move in a direction on something, you start doing some. And if it makes sense as you learn about it and you feel out what it is, you do more. So you try not to make it an all or nothing decision. Of course, selling your house, that's pretty difficult too. That's a big single decision. But it's, I suggest to friends and that you put down what you have on a spreadsheet or a piece of paper, and you think about where do I have too much? What do I have too much of? Am I entirely in one thing essentially? Or do I have a bunch of different things, but they're all exposed to the same risk? So there was a fellow in Sweden, became a friend of mine, who realized when he heard me talk about this, he had inherited quite a bit, and he had put it all using modern portfolio theory into a diversified portfolio of over 100 stocks that paid dividends. And he had a really bad day when he realized this. He had no risk diversification in terms of this monolithic risk. And he went to the extent of he had to leave Sweden in order to be able to open an account, to be able to start getting share certificates as a way of getting something out of this pooled form of having equities. But he's also moved back into the business that his grandfather was in, which was the source of wealth, which was actually owning real things, real estate. So he's kind of come full circle and is moving back into sensibly buying properties that people have to have, small commercial properties, things like that. So again, you look at, you just come up with some ideas and start adding some other things. But I've, as I said, I have money in bank accounts in different places. But I know that if we could hit a point where that's just gone. And so I've also leaned hard on just being able to physically live through a number of years that could be very difficult, as my grandparents experienced. They had no debt in the business or practice or on their homes, but it was still very difficult to get through those years, even having no debt. And you do things like, my dad and my grandfather. My dad built our house in 1958, and I noticed as a boy we had this room in the basement, fairly large room with a square room, and my mom there was shelving all around it. My mom dutifully organized everything in there and restocked it and rotated all the canned goods in there. And I asked my dad, and so my grandfather's house had the same thing. It was built in 1922. And I asked my dad, why do we have this? And he said, well, people used to think you should have about a year's supply of food in the house. And I thought, that's crazy. Why? And he said, well, you know, you could lose your job, you could get sick, and that was really your insurance. So there are things like that. I've built a greenhouse. You know, I have a big garden. I have orchards. I've bought more farmland. These are all things that I would not be doing if we were not going into this. I would happily live in the city and buy my food at the grocery store. But you know, I think you make it a good thing for yourself. Every year the answer has kept coming up that this is what I need to do.
Wonderful. Is there anything I haven't asked you that you would like to address before we close out?
Well, thank you, David, for the opportunity to speak. Good questions, very good questions and exposition. I think I'd like to say that, you know, the point of my work here is to spread awareness of this. And what do I mean by that? What is the awareness? It is that the central problem is the control by the central banks. And this is joined at the hip with the never-ending wars. And it has always been so. Through the history of the Bank of England, through the history of the Federal Reserve, and we have to recognize we are in an escalating hybrid war right now, and we have to face up to this. So we need. I said to a lawyer, you know, Shakespeare said, first let's kill all the lawyers, but now we need you. We need the lawyers to become personally outraged and personally engaged in this. This sleight of hand behind the taking of property here, it is criminal fraud. And it just is. It's criminal fraud, and it can be prosecuted as criminal fraud. The problem is, as we've seen, the courts are controlled, you know, not by the public. So how do we work through this? What they're doing here is taking the assets of people free of payment, without their knowledge, free of payment. So how is it unwound? The law has been subverted at the state level in the US with the changes to the Uniform Commercial Code. In Europe, it has been done in each country. So it would have to be unwound that way. But then you still have the central problem of the control by the central banks. And we need, for the sake of humanity, we have to end that. In the history of the United States, the founding fathers knew that this absolutely must not happen. And yet they got in there, and then the bank was killed a number of times. But now we've been in this for better than a century. So the control is deep. But what's happening right now is it's totalitarian in terms of ambition here. And it's an insane logic that has now been taken to the point of injuring all people globally, all the way to the top of the system. Now, what that means, and this is very important, that this awareness is spread all the way to the top of the system. What that means is that divide and rule at some point will not work here. People can actually unite behind this to say this has to be ended. Now, if I can take a little more time, I'll just say that primates naturally live in groups of 30 to 80 individuals. And above that, they then break off into another group. And humans did the same thing. You know, it's a village or a tribal group. And within that group, there's a kind of symbiosis of different abilities, disabilities, sleep patterns, all kinds of things. So my wife has pointed out that in a group like this, someone was always awake during the night. Someone was always handling something that other people were not handling. But there is also people that we describe as sociopaths. That is a naturally occurring thing. And these are people who have no remorse about hurting things. They might even like it. And now when you think of it, back in we're old enough to remember when kids went out and actually played together, outside. And, you knew who your playmates were. You knew who they were, absolutely. So if you think about it, within a group like this, from childhood, people would know who the individuals were that were like this, that didn't have a problem killing and hurting things. So did they need to kill them? No. They would probably invite them out on the hunting party. They were good at that. There was some, it wasn't a maladaptation, it was an adaptation that worked in the group somehow. But as I say, you take them on the hunting party, but you wouldn't let them babysit the kids. So you knew who they were. The problem in our society is we're on such an inhuman scale that people like this can run unchecked. They're not recognized, and they can run unchecked. Now, here's the big problem. What happens if you give them unlimited funding? That is why we are threatened, and it's very serious, because we will be in this forever unless we stop that. So their unlimited funding has to stop. Now, if we had a finite money system, as the founding fathers wanted, you could have people like this that would get control of something somewhere, but it would burn itself out. It would run its course. It wouldn't destroy everyone everywhere. There were other people that could carry on. We've allowed this to become monolithic. So ultimately, my concern right now is if you go into this history of people, the thinkers behind these socialist movements. And again, central planning is good for roads and things like that, but there's a point where it tips from benevolence into malevolence. And you can recognize it. You can see when that's happening. But by mid-century, the Club of Rome, people like Bertrand Russell, we're talking about this idea that if we're not going to have war, we have to have something else that is like war, that will actually threaten and kill people. That was their idea of a humanitarian idea, that we have to, if we're going to end war, we have to have something that will be as big a threat. So they were discussing things like using pollution as that threat that would then provide a justification to save the planet. This then morphed into, this incarnation with global warming and saving the planet. The problem is it's bullshit. And it is not going to work as a control narrative. So if you watch what is happening, the warfare is escalating because that's all they know how to do. They do not know how to stop. So what's happened in Ukraine, what's happened in Gaza, these things are very open atrocities. In real time here in Sweden, the government has begun essentially threatening the public that they must prepare for war. This is happening real time, right? It makes no sense at all. There is no reason that Sweden should be attacked. But so what I'm saying is we are in this end stage phenomena of this financialization and the bust. And so it's not just about money. This is way beyond that.
All right. Are you happy to end there? Or?
Well, I would say that the answers are very simple. I would say, David, you mentioned some things in the pre-call as things to live by. I would say, one, give people back their stuff. It's an economic policy. Don't take their stuff. It's not as if you can't know who has what amount of money in the banks and who owns what. All the records are there. It's a complete, a construct to say, well, we just have to take your stuff. So don't take their stuff and stop hurting people. As simple as that. And the real world is actually tremendously benevolent. And we just have to stop this insane malevolence.
I can't help but add, and I'll give it back to you so you can have the final word, but I just have to say, being pretty world traveled and, all kinds of different cultures and how much it enriches you and helps, experiential knowledge to me is the best. I can't say anywhere that I've been where the people are generally good. I mean, quick one was Colombia. And, my picture in my mind from the mainstream news was, there's a machine gun on every corner. That particular trip for me was one of the most eye-opening because I never met a group of people that were more open, hospitable. They didn't know me from anybody, invited me in, they could ride their horses. I mean, it was just incredible. And I just am a huge believer for my more than, little experience, been well outside the States many times, of just the great goodness of the humanity as a whole. It's just these frickin' leaders, these sociopaths that work their way to the top and control. I mean, my main thesis is several, but one is all fiat fails, and two is money is power. And because it's power, you can control people through it. And that's why most of these Congress critters are bought and paid for. But we could go on and on. I don't want to. I think you did an excellent job. I admire you, your time, and your bravery, your courage, because this isn't something that everybody's willing to talk about. I mean, I got a lot of, eggs thrown at me at the beginning because people just didn't believe that, honest money had a different societal measure or moral structure to it than a fiat system that always fails. So back to you, final word. And again, thank you for your time.
Well, I'd say if you notice, a number of people have started talking about the reality that we are mortal. we're gonna die, and we fairly soon the construct will no longer exist. So this idea, people are, it's a kind of insanity that people are so, the whole world revolves around, the whole universe around their persona. And it's what's happening now is people are getting to a point where they're transcending that because you have to. There's no alternative at this point. You have to. I think people will realize that they are spiritual beings without hanging a religion on it. I think the religions have let us down through this, but the spirituality is coming out, and I never considered myself really to be a person like that. But it's, once you've gone through a kind of death and come back from that, you say, well, what is worth living for? And we now have, to have the possibility of doing something when we're faced with something that is threatening all of humanity. I can't imagine anything bigger to be part of. And to not be afraid of dying is a very freeing thing. To let that go, then it's kind of like having superpowers. You can do it. There's a lot of stuff you can do if you're not worried about dying.
Right. I think we can close it there. Thank you so much for your time. Hopefully you may grant me another interview. I'm sure we'll probably generate more questions. If there's any connections that I can make for you that you want, please reach out. I will do so. And again, I wish you the best. And I've been to Stockholm many times. I like it over there. I hope you enjoy your time there. And I guess you've made that your permanent place of living right now.
Well, I'm here now because I'm not going to run anymore.
Good for you.
Okay, thank you so much, David. This has really been a very good experience. Thank you.
You're most welcome.